Welcome to the DVERT Brief. I'm Dr. Meg McBride, Director of the Domestic Violent Extremism Research and Translation Center at CNA. This podcast series highlights new research, trends, and findings on violent extremism in America. Designed for policymakers, practitioners, and anyone curious about the evolving domestic threat landscape, this AI-generated podcast delivers concise and accessible summaries of our latest work. Thanks for listening.
In today's episode, we'll be exploring key insights from our report BTAM, Cooperation, Not Coercion. Let's dive in.
This report focuses on behavioral threat assessment and management, the goal of which is preventing terrorism and targeted violence.
And by targeted violence, just to be clear, we mean a premeditated act, right? Aimed at a specific target. The motivation doesn't really matter for the definition itself.
Exactly.
So what's the main takeaway here? The title kind of gives it away. Cooperation, not coercion.
That's really the heart of it. What's fascinating and what this report highlights is that BTAM, when it works best, it has to be cooperative.
Because it's ideally happening before any laws are broken or any violence has occurred.
Precisely. You're operating in what the report calls the pre-criminal space. The person hasn't committed an offense that, brings in the full force of the criminal justice system.
So you don't have that so-called legal stick, essentially.
You really don't, which means everything hinges on early identification, offering support, and getting real sustained collaboration going, between the schools, mental health folks, the family, everyone involved.
Without that buy-in, you're stuck.
Pretty much. You hit a wall.
And this is where it gets really practical, especially for people working in schools or communities. The report talks about the limits of trying to force things, the coercion side.
Yeah, the stick approach just doesn't work. Take schools, for example. Legally, they often can't just mandate a mental health evaluation for a student to come back.
Right? Their hands are tied in many cases.
And the school administrators the report's authors spoke to were really clear. Expelling a student doesn't fix the threat.
No, it just kicks the can down the road.
Exactly. It just passes the threat onto another school, as they put it. The underlying issues are still there. Okay, so if we look at the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center guidelines, they actually assume schools will lead on most cases.
Because most incidents can, and maybe should, be handled with school and community resources.
That's the idea. Law enforcement really only steps in when a threat is severe or clearly imminent, or, actual criminal activity has already happened.
Which reinforces the need for non-coercive approaches much earlier. There's a great quote from a Wood County stakeholder in the report, something about early intervention.
Ah, yes. One stakeholder said that the earlier you're able to intervene, the less options for following up you have. Essentially, in that pre-criminal space, early intervention means you have less coercive tools at your disposal.
So you absolutely need that cooperation, that buy-in. You can't rely on threats or legal orders that often aren't available anyway.
That's the core message.
Okay. So if coercion is limited, what does the report suggest we do instead? How should policy and practice shift?
It points to three pretty key policy implications. First one is about leadership. The idea is that BTAM efforts should ideally be led by non-law enforcement groups. Think schools or maybe county mental health boards. This gives them more flexibility to build those long-term cooperative relationships. That's crucial when you're working in that pre-criminal space where trust is everything. The second is about implementation order. The recommendation is to focus on building prevention systems for youth first.
Start with kids. Why?
Well, generally, youth are in a more supervised setting, an enclosed system like school. It makes intervention efforts potentially more manageable, more achievable.
Before tackling the more complex adult population.
Right. It's a strategic place to start building capacity and getting wins.
Okay, leadership and starting with youth. What's the third piece?
It's about training, since practitioners often have limited leverage, limited ways to force engagement.
They need different skills.
Precisely. They need training and strategies that actually build someone's motivation to change. You can't compel. So you have to persuade, or rather, help them find their own reasons to change.
Okay, like what kind of strategies?
The report specifically calls out motivational interviewing, or MI. It's an evidence-based approach, very client-centered.
I've heard of that. It's about drawing out the person's own reasons for change, right? Not telling them what to do.
Exactly. It's about partnership, acceptance, compassion, evocation, drawing it out of them. Things like rolling with resistance instead of fighting it, expressing empathy, helping them work through their own ambivalence.
And some counties have actually done this, offered MI training.
Yeah, the report mentions one county offered MI training to community professionals back in May 2024. So it's not just theoretical. Places are starting to implement this.
So the bottom line is, if you want BTAM to work, especially early on, you need cooperative structures led by non-police entities. Maybe start with youth systems. And definitely train your people in skills like MI to build motivation, not force compliance.
That really captures the essence of it. Building that intrinsic motivation is key when coercion isn't really an option. It's about ethical and effective prevention. This podcast was produced with the assistance of artificial intelligence tools, but the content was based on research done by the DVERT Center, which is housed within CNA, a nonprofit research and analysis organization dedicated to advancing the safety and security of the nation. The research on which this podcast is based was supported by the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. Adaptation of this research for the DVERT Brief was supported by the National Institute of Justice. The views and conclusions contained in this podcast are those of the authors and should not be interpreted as necessarily representing the official policies either expressed or implied of DHS, SNT, or the National Institute of Justice.